topic of today's lecture is histopathology of the gastric disease disorder. I'm Dr. Nehar. So the objectives of today's lecture is to identify the various gastric diseases, to determine the pathology of these diseases, and to determine the histopathological features of these diseases. So first of all, the introduction. Disorder of the stomach are a frequent cause of clinical disease, with inflammatory and neoplastic lesion being particularly the most common. So the topic which we are going to discuss are acute gastritis, chronic gastritis, peptic ulcer, gastric polyp, and the malignant disorders. And among the malignant disorder, the most frequent is the adenocarcinoma of the stomach. So these topics we are going to discuss in this lecture because these are the most important topics regarding the gastric pathologies. So the first of all, acute gastritis. Acute gastritis is a transient mucosal inflammatory process. It may be asymptomatic. A patient come up with no symptom or cause variable degree of epigastric pain, nausea, vomiting. And in more severe cases, if it persists for not for a long time, but because of increased mucosal erosion, or if there is severe ulceration or hemorrhage, then it can cause massive blood loss, which can lead to hematemesis and melena, that is the blood in the stool. So the causes of acute gastritis are, the most common is associated with heavy use of NSAID, that is the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug. Most commonly is the aspirin, or if there is excessive use of alcohol or excessive use of heavy smoking, it can cause acute gastritis. Or if the patient is on chemotherapy because of cancer, it can cause acute gastritis, radiation related with the cancer therapy. Or if there is severe stress, which may be because of trauma or because of burning or because of surgery, this can also lead to acute gastritis to the patient. Or alkaline or acid ingestion as a part of a suicidal attempt. So it can also lead to acute gastritis. And these alkaline or acidic ingestion, this can cause severe acute gastritis leading to hemorrhage and melena and excessive blood loss. Or mechanical trauma to the GI tract, like for example, when you insert the nasogastric tube, it can cause acute gastritis. So all these causes, increase amount of NSAID intake, or excessive alcohol or smoking, or chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or because of burning, trauma, or ingestion of alkaline or acid, these all causes what? It causes the increase in the HCl secretion, acid secretion. And this increase in the acid secretion lead to the damage to the epithelium, which causes active inflammation and leading to acute gastritis. So we come to the histopathological feature of acute gastritis. So grossly, with the naked eye, what we see in acute, if the acute gastritis is mild, you may not see anything with your naked eye on the stomach. But if it is a severe disease, if acute gastritis is severe, then you may find mucosal damage, erosions, areas of hemorrhage, dark punctus in otherwise hyperemic mucosa, that is red colored mucosa because of the increased blood flow in the mucosa. So, or you can find presence of erosion and hemorrhage also. And when there is a concurrent presence of erosion and hemorrhage in the gastric mucosa, the term which we use is acute erosive hemorrhagic gastritis. Acute gastritis, it means that there is gastritis, but acute gastritis with erosion and with the hemorrhage, then the term is used acute erosive hemorrhagic gastritis. So acute gastritis with concurrent presence of erosion and hemorrhage is termed as acute erosive hemorrhagic gastritis. So microscopically, what we find in acute gastritis is, in mild to moderate gastritis, you find edema in the lamina propria, vascular congestion, increased amount of vessels, but here the epithelium remain intact. You may find scattered neutrophil because the inflammatory process and acute inflammatory process is going on, and neutrophils are the acute inflammatory cells. So what you find is a scattered neutrophil because if it is mild, and if it is severe, then you find a lot number of neutrophils, and in the mild you will find the intact epithelium. But if the gastritis is severe or moderate, then you may find the erosion of the epithelium. You may find hemorrhage in the mucosa, erosion in the more severe form, so and loss of superficial epithelium in the severe form. So this is the H&E slide, hematoxylin eosin slide of a patient of acute gastritis. So you can appreciate the glands. These are the glands. And in between the glands, this is the lamina propria, which I was talking about, that in the lamina propria, you may find the scattered neutrophils. So as the neutrophils are below, you can appreciate these are the neutrophils, these are the neutrophils. So what you will find is that the scattered neutrophils, which are the acute inflammatory cells, which will be found in the lamina propria. And the lamina propria is the area which is between the glands. And these are the glands. Okay. And the epithelium lining the glands, it is normal. It is not eroded in acute gastritis, whereas in severe gastritis, you may find the erosion of these epithelial cells. So now I'm coming to the chronic gastritis, which is another important topic of today's lecture. So the presence of chronic mucosal inflammation. Here again, there is inflammation, but the chronicity is increased. The time period is increased. Secondly, along with inflammatory cells, what you will find as the time period is increased, it will lead to mucosal atrophy, intestinal metaplasia, with or without erosions. Because if the chronic gastritis is mild, so it may not cause any erosion of the epithelium, but if it is the chronic gastritis is severe, it can lead to erosion. Intestinal metaplasia, the presence of the goblet cells. Normally in the gastric mucosa, you don't find it goblet cells. Goblet cells are found in the duodenum, okay, in the intestine. So if these intestinal cells, these goblet cells, they are present in the gastric mucosa, it means that the gastric cells are undergoing in the metaplasia. So you may find intestinal metaplasia when the patient is having chronic gastritis, because the gastric mucosa is chronically irritated. So it may lead to intestinal metaplasia, it may lead to mucosal atrophy, and there may be or may not be erosion. It depends upon the severity of the inflammation. So these are the three things which you find in chronic gastritis, which is not found in the acute gastritis. Mucosal atrophy, intestinal metaplasia, erosion, it can be found in acute and as well as chronic gastritis, depend upon the severity. Now we come to the signs and symptoms of the chronic gastritis. They are typically less severe, but more persistent. It means that there is like for example in acute gastritis, abdominal pain, the burning sensation, it is more severe in the acute gastritis, but the time period is not much. It is of less duration. But for chronic gastritis, as it is of long period of time, so it is the signs and symptoms are persistent, but the symptoms are not very severe in chronic gastritis. Okay. And sometimes the patient come up with the vomiting, and hematemesis is not very common in chronic gastritis. In acute gastritis, it is common because if there is ingestion of the alkaline or the acid or the burning, so this acute severe acute gastritis can lead to hematemesis. But in chronic gastritis, it is very uncommon. So now we come up the causes of the chronic gastritis. The most important cause of chronic gastritis is the chronic infection, which is the cause of H. pylori, Helicobacter pylori. This is a bacteria. So infection of the Helicobacter pylori is the most common cause of chronic gastritis. Then autoimmune, pernicious anemia can cause chronic gastritis. Alcohol for a long period of time, it can cause the chronic gastritis, smoking, radiation. And among all these causes, the most common cause is the H. pylori, chronic gastritis associated with H. pylori. Autoimmune gastritis is also a most common cause of atrophic gastritis, but it represents only 10% of all the cases of chronic gastritis. So here I'm talking about the H. pylori associated gastritis because it is the most common cause of chronic gastritis. and one of the most important topic as far as we are concerned with exam point of view. So H. pylori gastritis, chronic infection is approximately two-thirds of the population worldwide. Prevalence is decreasing due to improved sanitation, antibiotic use. Okay, so chronic infection is it is present in two-thirds of the population, and but this is decreasing because of improved sanitation, because of antibiotic use. So H. pylori infection is decreasing with the improvement of sanitation and antibiotic use. Prevalence in the developing country is greater as compared to the developed countries. Again, this is because of improved sanitation, and up to 90% when infection usually occur in childhood. This H. pylori infection usually 90% of the cases occur in early childhood. So infection usually are asymptomatic, but with chronicity of this infection, then the patient come up with acidity and with burning sensation. And if it persists and you do not take any treatment, then it can lead to peptic ulcer disease, which is present in 15 to 20%. There is 15 to 20% risk of developing of peptic ulcer disease in H. pylori infection. And 70% of the gastric cancers are also associated with H. pylori gastritis. So we should not take H. pylori infection very lightly. We should treat them, and the treatment is not very much difficult. You just have to take the antibiotics. So treatment is better because it may lead to gastric cancer, because as I have told you that 70% of the gastric cancers are related to the H. pylori infections. So now we come up the investigation regarding the H. pylori infection. First of all is the serological test for the antibody of the H. pylori, or the fecal bacterial detection, or urea breath test is also done for H. pylori detection. And the gold standard is the gastric biopsy. You take up the gastric biopsy and then you visualize this organism. Now we come to the histopathological features of H. pylori chronic gastritis associated with H. pylori. So grossly what you find is the red mucosa because of chronic inflammation, coarser texture than normal, and you may have thickened folds of the stomach, which may become thin or flat. If the disease is of long term, then it may flatten or thin out the mucosal fold, that are the rugal folds of the stomach. And usually it affects the antrum if it is present in the children. Usually it affects the antral part of the stomach. So microscopically, what you find is bacteria, the H. pylori bacteria is curved shape. So you find curved organism in this, and it is usually present in the superficial mucosal layer overlying the epithelial cells. And along with this organism, what you find is because this organism starts the inflammatory process. So you find the chronic inflammatory cells. Along with this, you find the germinal center, active germinal center. This is a follicular gastritis. This is what you find the inflammatory cells and the lymphocytes. They make the follicles. They are arranged in the circular form with a germinal center within it. So this is the chronic gastritis, chronic follicular gastritis, along with the plasma cells in the lamina propria. Okay, and H. pylori also cause intestinal metaplasia. Intestinal metaplasia, as I have told you, what is intestinal metaplasia? It is the presence of the goblet cells within the gastric mucosa. Normally, the goblet cells are present in the intestine. So when they are present in the stomach, we call it intestinal metaplasia, and this is because of the chronic inflammation. And it may be seen in the H. pylori. When we come up as a histopathologist, if we see the H. pylori within the biopsy, within the gastric biopsy, we always look for the intestinal metaplasia, because if there is intestinal metaplasia, then intestinal metaplasia is associated with increased risk of gastric adenocarcinoma. So if the patient has intestinal metaplasia, then we recommend him to follow up because of increased risk of gastric adenocarcinoma. So this is the hemotoxin and eosin slide of gastric biopsy, and this is the gland. Again, you can appreciate the gland, and on the both side is the lamina propria. So within the lumen of the gland, you can see the curve organism, linear curved organism. These are the H. pylori organisms. These are the H. pylori organisms you see in, these are the H. pylori organisms, linear and curved organisms. These should be curved and they are very, very thin out, but they are curved organisms, and we find it on the overlying epithelium. This is the epithelium, and we find in the overlying epithelium in the lumina of the glands. Again, another H&E stained slide. This is a gland, and within the lumen of the gland, you can appreciate the curved organism, and these are the H. pylori. This is the epithelium and overlying epithelium. This is the lumen of the gland, and in the lumen you find the curved organism. These are the H. pylori. And the special stain which we do for the H. pylori is the Giemsa stain. And here you saw this is the H&E stain, which is a normal stain which we do in the histopathological labs. But the special stain which is done for the H. pylori is Giemsa stain, which stain the tissue blue. And here you can appreciate that these H. pylori organisms are more clear, and there are abundant of H. pylori organisms. You can appreciate it's here. The lumen is full of H. pylori organisms. So the lumen is full of H. pylori organisms. This is a gland. Again, I'm telling you, this is a gland, and this is the lumen of the gland. And in the lumen of the gland, these are the curved H. pylori organisms, and which is more appreciated on the special stain, that is Giemsa. Again, the Giemsa stain showing the H. pylori organism. I think now it's very, very clear to you that how these organisms appear under microscope. Now, till now we have discussed acute gastritis and the chronic gastritis, and this chronic gastritis can lead to peptic ulcer disease, which is one of the important topics. So, peptic ulcer is a chronic lesion, solitary, occur in any part of the alimentary tract due to the exposure of excessive acid peptic juices. In the duodenum, it involves the first part. In the stomach, it usually involves the antrum. Gastroesophageal junction, the junction which is between the part which is between the stomach and the esophagus, is the gastroesophageal junction. GE junction can also have peptic ulcer, and this is because of the reflux of the acid. If duodenum and the stomach is involved, it is usually in the Jolligen-Ellison syndrome. And in a peptic ulcer disease, the etiology is mostly the H. pylori infection. 100% in duodenal ulcer, and in 75% cases in gastric ulcer, the etiology is H. pylori infection. So we come up to the histological features of the peptic ulcer. Grossly, gastric ulcer, in the gastric ulcer, they are usually present on the lesser curvature of the stomach. There are two curvatures, the greater curvature and the lesser curvature. So the most common site for the gastric ulcer is the lesser curvature. And the size is usually single, round, and it is usually less than 4 centimeters, and edges are sharp, not heaped up. On the other hand, duodenal ulcers are usually present on the anterior or the posterior wall of the first part of the duodenum. First part of the duodenum is more prone to the duodenal ulcer, and they are prone to the duodenal ulcer, and size usually they are solitary. Sometimes they are paired up. Two ulcers, they pair up on both the walls, and they form the kissing ulcers, and the edge are sharp and demarcated. So this is the gross picture, the ulcer which we can see with the naked eye on the stomach wall. This is the gastric ulcer with the sharp edges. Microscopic feature. Microscopically, when we see a peptic ulcer, we can identify 4 zones. Superficial, the necrotic layer, zone of inflammation. Then we see the layer of granulation tissue, and at the base is the fibrosis. So I'm going to discuss this here in this diagram, which is taken from your book. Normally, what you see in the stomach is the mucus, then the mucosa. In the mucosa, you can see the glands, okay, and then the muscularis mucosae and the submucosa. The forces or the factors which can cause the damage to the wall are gastric acidity, if the acid is increased, or the peptic enzymes. are increased. They can cause the damage to the wall. But these enzymes, or this wall is protected by these two enzymes which are naturally present in the stomach. Their defensive process which the Almighty has given us, or the Almighty has given to the wall of the stomach, is the surface mucosa, bicarbonates, mucosa blood flow, and apical regenerative capacity, and the elaboration of the prostaglandin. So these are the defensive mechanisms which protect the wall of the stomach from the damaging effects of the gastric acidity and the peptic enzymes. So if there is any injury which can be because of H. pylori infection, because of NSAIDs intake, most commonly the aspirin, cigarette smoking, alcohol, gastric hyperacidity, these all cause gastric hyperacidity or reflux. So what it causes, it starts the injury to the wall of the stomach. So it causes ischemia, shock, delay, gastric emptying, or host factors. These all causes what? Decrease damage, increase damage, or impair the defense mechanism. So it causes the peptic ulcer. So what we find in the peptic ulcer, the 4 zones in the peptic ulcer, the most on the top is the necrotic debris, followed by the inflammatory cells, then the granulation tissue. Granulation tissue means the inflammatory cells with blood vessels, and then the fibrosis. So these are the 4 layers which are find in which we can find in the peptic ulcer. What are these? I'm again repeating, this is the important thing to be remembered. What we find in the peptic ulcer, on the top is the necrotic debris, then the inflammatory infiltrate, then the granulation tissue, and then the fibrosis. So this is the H&E slide, the picture which we see under the microscope. So this is a gastric biopsy. Here you can appreciate that the glands are normal, the epithelium is normal. But what happened here? Here an ulcer is formed. In the ulcer, what you can see is that the necrotic debris is there, inflammatory infiltrate is there. Then this is not at high power. Under the inflammatory infiltrate is the granulation tissue and then the fibrosis. Okay, and in this you can also appreciate the mucosa and the muscularis mucosae. This is the muscularis mucosae, then the submucosa and the muscularis propria, and this is a blood vessel, and in the last is the serosa. Again, one more H&E slide of peptic ulcer. So, balki in every ulcer you find this these things, that the debris is there, then the inflammatory infiltrate is there, then the granulation tissue, and in the last is the fibrosis. So till now we have discussed the inflammatory diseases which are related to the stomach, that is the acute gastritis, chronic gastritis, and the peptic ulcer. And now I'm coming towards the neoplastic diseases of the stomach. So the neoplastic diseases of the stomach are gastric polyps, adenocarcinoma, lymphoma, carcinoid tumors. But among these, the most important are the gastric polyps and the adenocarcinoma of the stomach. So gastric polyps. The gastric polyps, these are the polyps, polypoidal, nodule, or mass that project above the level of the surrounding mucosa. They are the projected mass and are identified in up to 5% of the upper gastrointestinal tract biopsies. In 5% of the upper GIT biopsy, we find the gastric polyps. So they may develop as a result of epithelial or stromal cell hyperplasia, because of inflammation, because of ectopia, or because of any neoplasia. So the different type of polyps are the hyperplastic or the inflammatory polyps, funding gland polyps, or the adenomas. So we are going to discuss one by one these polyps, because these polyps are very important. You should read it carefully and try to understand them carefully, because they are important for the exam point of view. So the hyperplastic polyp, 85% associated with chronic gastritis, because hyperplastic, as the word tell you, hyperplastic or the inflammatory polyp. So they are related with the inflammation. So 85% of the hyperplastic or the inflammatory polyps, they are associated with the chronic gastritis. It may be with or without association with the H. pylori. Usually less than 1 centimeter, more than 50% are less than 0.5 centimeter. However, if they are large polyps there which are up to 12 centimeter, so they may mimic the malignancy because and they may, if these polyps are present at the junction or at the entrance of the esophagus at the end of the esophagus or at the end of the stomach, it may cause the obstruction. And you may have to rule out that you have to rule out you have to rule out the dysplasia. And hello, yes,
जी
I
मैडम।
think that हाँ कनेक्शन वो हो गया था शायद।
जी जी।
हाँ अच्छा So we were on the hyperplastic polyp and we were discussing the sites of the hyperplastic polyp. So the most common site is the gastric antrum, but it can occur anywhere in the stomach. And if we are dealing with the autoimmune gastritis, then the most common site is the body of the stomach. And the hyperplastic polyp at the gastroesophageal junction, if it is present at the junction between the esophagus and the stomach, then it is related with the Barrett esophagus in 33% of the cases. The frequency in the hyperplastic polyp for the dysplasia depends upon the size of the polyp. If the size, as the size increases, the risk of the dysplasia also increases. So there is an significant increase in the risk of dysplasia if the polyps are greater than 1.5 centimeter. So now we come up to the clinical features of the polyps, hyperplastic polyp. Usually the symptoms are that of the chronic gastritis because in most of the cases they are related with the chronic gastritis. So the patient come up with burning sensation or abdominal pain. So these are the clinical features of, and if these polyps are larger in size and they are present near the pylorus or the gastroesophageal junction, then the patient may have the obstructive symptom. So, and for the diagnosis, we have to do the histopathological examination, and for that we have to do the resection through endoscopy, and then we do the histopathological examination. Treatment for the hyperplastic polyp is on follow-up, 67% are stable; they do not regress. 27% of the polyps they enlarge, and 5% they become smaller. 71% of the dysplastic hyperplastic polyps they regress after the treatment of H. pylori, and 50% occur after resection by the endoscopy. So now we come to the histopathological features of the hyperplastic polyp. So as the word tells you polyp, so you will find a polypoidal growth, ovoid with a smooth overlying mucosa. Surface erosion may be present, and we have to submit it entirely to rule out dysplasia or malignancy when we are dealing with the polyps. Microscopically, what we find is elongated, cystically dilated glands, which may be distorted. And in the lamina propria, again, the area between the glands, you find edema, you find acute and chronic inflammatory infiltrate, you find congestion, and inflammation usually towards the surface. And on the surface, you may find the erosions, that is the loss of epithelium. You may find ulceration, and thick walled blood vessels, they are present at the base of the polyp. So what are the important points when you are dealing with the hyperplastic polyp, as it is the inflammatory polyp? So you will find the inflammatory infiltrate in the lamina propria, as it is a polyp. So the glands will be cystically dilated. They may be distorted, and on the surface you may find ulceration, erosion, and in all the polyps you find thick walled blood vessels normally in most of the cases. So this is the gastric hyperplastic polyp. So first of all, what you will appreciate that it is a polypoidal growth. Okay. Then what you will see that the glands are cystically dilated. And in between the glands, there is inflammation, there is hemorrhage, and there are blood vessels. So this is the exophytic lesion, the severely dilated gland. This is the gastric hyperplastic polyp. So again, on the high power, you can appreciate the cystically dilated glands. These are the glands which are dilated. Normally, the size of the glands is this one. And here you can appreciate that these glands are dilated. In between the glands, the lamina propria is there. And in the lamina propria, there is edema. Edema shows how you can appreciate the edema, that the cells are apart from each other. So there is edema, there are inflammatory cells, and there is hemorrhage, and there are blood vessels in it. Okay. So now I'm coming to the next type of the gastric polyp, that is the funding gland polyp. So funding gland polyp occur sporadically or in person with familial adenomatous polyposis, but they do not have the neoplastic potential. This is very important. There's a funding gland polyp, they don't have any neoplastic potential. I mean, what I mean by neoplastic potential, I mean that they do not transform into a carcinoma or into a malignant uh, malignant cell. Okay, so their incidence has increased markedly as a result of the use of it. It is usually present. The funding gland polyps are usually present in the patient who are using proton pump inhibitors, and this is likely because of increased gastrin secretion, which is released in response to reduce the acidity. The patient which have acidity, so it means they are the patient of chronic gastritis. Okay, so they take the proton pump inhibitor. These proton pump inhibitor, they increase the secretion of the gastrin, and this can cause the formation of the funding gland polyps. Okay, the funding gland polyps may be asymptomatic, or they may be associated with nausea, vomiting, or epigastric pain. Grossly, what you find, they are typically small, they are sessile, and the surface is glassy, and they are usually less than a centimeter. They are circumscribed polyp, and they usually occur in the gastric body of fundus. That is why they are called the funding gland polyp, and they are usually multiple. Microscopically, as it is a gland, you find cystically dilated glands, irregular glands, and which are lined by flat parietal and chief cells. So the difference between the fundic polyp and the hyperplastic or the inflammatory polyp is that in the hyperplastic polyp you find increased number of inflammatory, acute and chronic inflammatory cells in the lamina propria, whereas in the fundic gland polyp you won't find increased amount of inflammatory cells, but what you will find is the cystically dilated irregular glands are there, which are lined by the parietal or the chief cells. So this is the gross picture. One thing which we can appreciate is they are multiple. They are small in size, they are usually less than 1 centimeter, but they are multiple and they are shiny, and they are present in the body or the fundus of the stomach. So these are the funding gland polyps. Excuse me. So this is the H&E slide of the funding gland polyp. So again, it is the polyp. The first thing which you are going to appreciate is that it is a polypoidal. It is polypoidal in shape. Then you will find the cystically dilated glands within this. Okay, and these glands, they are lined with by the parietal cells, and you can appreciate that there are no increased amount of, there are inflammatory cells, you can appreciate there are lymphocytes, but there is no increased amount of neutrophils, lymphocytes, and plasma cell in funding gland polyp if we compare this with the hyperplastic or the inflammatory polyp. Again, the high power, high magnification of the same polyp, so you can appreciate the dilated glands. These are the dilated glands, and they are lined by the parietal cells and chief cells, but there are no inflammatory cells between it. Okay, and there is no edema like we have seen in the hyperplastic or the inflammatory polyp. So now I'm coming to the third type of the polyp, that is the gastric adenoma. They account for 8 to 10% of all gastric polyp, and they may be flat or depressed, and relatively they are rare in Western population. Incidence increases with the age. They are more common in male as compared to female. The ratio is 3:1, and they are associated with the autoimmune gastritis, intestinal metaplasia, and familial adenomatous polyposis. This is important. The risk for the development of adenocarcinoma is related to the size of the lesion, and in the adenoma, the dysplasia is inbuilt. There is always dysplasia in gastric adenomas. Overall carcinoma may be present in 30% of the gastric adenomas. So histopathological features, grossly, they are usually single. They are up to 4 centimeters. They can be sessile or they can be pedunculated. They may have peduncle or they may be sessile. And rarely they are depressed mucosal lesions. They appear as depressed unipolar lesions. Microscopically, what we find is the polypoidal projection. As I have told you that as these are the polyps, so we find polypoidal projection, and they are lined. These polyps are lined by the dysplastic epithelium by definition. Then this is very important that the adenomas, not the hyperplastic polyp, not the fundic polyp. You may find dysplasia in the hyperplastic polyp, but not always. You have to search for it. But for adenomas, they are always lined by the dysplastic epithelium by definition. With and what I mean by dysplastic epithelium, that the epithelium shows pseudostratification. They show nuclear abnormality. Nuclear abnormality, I mean by nuclear abnormality means that there is uh, increased nuclear to cytoplasmic ratio. In a normal cell, the nucleus is small and the cytoplasm is the ratio of the cytoplasm is greater than the nucleus. But when the dysplasia starts, then the nuclei size of the nuclei become larger. So the ratio between the ratio of between the nuclei and the cytoplasm, it is deranged. It become increased. The nucleus become increased. You may find the mitotic figure and overlying the cystically dilated gland. Okay, so and if this dysplasia is of high grade, then the glands which are present within the polyp, they are cribriform, they are very crowded, they are irregular, there is branching, budding of the glands with marked cytological atypia. And again, with the cytological atypia, I mean that increase in nuclear to cytoplasmic ratio, there is mitotic figure, there are pseudostratifications. So this is the picture of adenoma, and here you can appreciate that it is polypoidal. Obviously, it is polypoidal, and the glands are lined by the dysplastic cells. And here you can appreciate, you can feel that the glands are lined by dark borders, and this darkening is due to the stratification. Stratification means increased layering of these epithelial cells. So you can appreciate the stratification. So you will find the stratification, and when you will see with the high magnification, then you will appreciate that the nuclear to cytoplasmic ratio is deranged. And what else you can see is mitosis. You can appreciate. So this is all about adenoma. So now I'm coming to the malignant lesion of the stomach, that is the gastric adenocarcinoma, and it is the most common carcinoma of the stomach. 90% of the malignant tumor in the stomach are adenocarcinoma, and the incidence is high in Japan, North Italy, China, and Portugal and Russia. Clinical features of gastric adenocarcinoma, usually they are asymptomatic until late, and late symptoms are weight loss, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, and altered bowel habit. Metastasis is usually to the supraclavicular node, that is the Washaw node, and it may be the first finding. It means that the patient come up for the first time when the tumor has unfortunately metastasized. And the most common sites are pylorus and antrum, followed by cardia. And lesser curvature is usually more prone to this adenocarcinoma as compared to the greater curvature. And well-differentiated tumors, they may grow very slowly as compared to the poorly differentiated tumors. Now we come to the Lorentz classification. Gastric adenocarcinoma are classified according to their location in the stomach, as well as gross and histological morphology. So the Lorentz classification divides the gastric carcinoma into intestinal type and the diffuse type. 54% of the adenocarcinoma, they are of intestinal type, whereas 32% are diffuse type. So we are going to discuss one by one. So the intestinal type, they form exophytic. Exophytics mean they form outer growth, polypoidal growth, or they are ulcerative growth. So they may form the exophytic growth or the ulcerated growth, and they are more in the distal stomach. Intestinal type is more commonly present in the distal part of the stomach, and it is related with the H. pylori infection. And old patients are usually affected in intestinal type, and there is male predominance, that is 2:1. The ratio is 2:1. But fortunately, for the intestinal type, the prognosis is better. And as the word tells you intestinal. It means that it appears like intestinal cells. So you find glandular element, you find the glands on the histology. When you see under the microscope the intestinal type of adenocarcinoma, you find the glands, but in the glands there is cytological atypia. So this is an intestinal type of adenocarcinoma, and you can appreciate the glandular formation. Normally the glands are like this. So there is cribriforming, there is budding, and there is infiltration. And if they are they are usually not present into the submucosa. So when they come up into the submucosa, so this invasion lead to the adenocarcinoma. And the diffuse type, it mainly affect the cardia, and they form the infiltrative lesion. You don't find particular glands, but the cells are discohesive. Separate cells are present, primitive cells are present in diffuse type, and there is no precancerous lesion. Like for example, for the intestinal type, the patient are usually have H. pylori infection, but there is no precancerous lesion in diffuse type, and usually there is loss of CDH1 gene, and you find signet ring cells in it. And I'm going to tell you what are signet ring cells in the next slide. And they usually occur, the diffuse type usually occur in the younger patient. And again, it is also more common in males as compared to the females. But for the diffuse type, the prognosis is poor. So what is the difference between the intestinal type and the diffuse type? This is an important question. So for intestinal type, they are usually present in the distal part of the stomach, whereas the diffuse type, it is usually present in the cardia of the stomach. They are due to intestinal type are usually due to H. pylori, whereas the diffuse type, there is no precancerous lesion. The intestinal type are usually present in the older patient, whereas the diffuse type, they are usually present in the younger patient. And for the intestinal type, the prognosis is better, whereas for the diffuse type, the prognosis is poor. In the intestinal type, you find the glandular element, whereas in the diffuse type, you find the discohesive cells. They don't form the glands. So these are the differentiating points between the intestinal type adenocarcinoma and the diffuse type adenocarcinoma, and this is important, and you should remember this. So again, this is the H&E slide of the intestinal diffuse type of adenocarcinoma, and you can see that they are not forming the glands. On the other hand, you see that there are discohesive separate cells lying, and why we call them the signet ring cells, because the nuclei, it come to one side, it is not in the center. The nuclei come to one side, appearing as a ring. See, it appears as if this is a ring, and this is the top, like a pearl of the ring. So that is why it is called the signet ring appearance of the cells. And this is a feature of a diffuse type adenocarcinoma of stomach. I think this is clear, and this is the important topic as far as malignant or malignant tumors of the gastric is concerned, stomach is concerned. Okay. Now the lymphoma, 55 to 75% of the primary gastrointestinal lymphomas are gastric. Lymphomas are 1 to 7% of the gastric malignancy, and mostly the patient are of older age, that is more than 60 years, and they clinically resemble carcinomas, and the prognosis is better. Now we come to the carcinoid. Carcinoid tumors arises from the neuroendocrine organs, that is the endocrine pancreas and neuroendocrine differentiated gastrointestinal epithelial cells. And these neuroendocrine differentiated gastrointestinal epithelial cells are the G cells, so they may arise from G cells. Majority are found in the gastrointestinal tract, and more than 40% occur in the small intestine. Gastric carcinoid may be associated with the endocrine cell hyperplasia, chronic atrophic gastritis, or Jolligen-Ellison syndrome. Now we come to the histopathology of the carcinoids. Grossly, they are intramural or submural. Intramural, they are involving all the layers, or they may be submucosal only on the just beneath the mucosa. The mass is just beneath the mucosa, or they may involve all the layers of the stomach, and that creates a small polypoidal lesion. They are yellow to tan in appearance, and microscopically they are composed of islands, trabeculae, strands, glands, or sheet of uniform cells with a scant pink granular cytoplasm and a round to oval stipple nuclei. I'm going to tell you these 2 points, loss and microscopic feature in this. Okay, so what you find is a yellow tanned appearing lesion, and it may be just below the mucosa, that is submucosal lesion, or it may involve all of the layers of the stomach. So there is a polypoidal lesion. So on with the naked eye you find a polypoidal lesion, and it is tanned or yellow in color. One is here and one is here. So this is the appearance of the gastric adenoids. And microscopically, what you find is the clusters and the nest and the trabeculae of uh, the cells, showing what they are forming an island of the tumor, and this island is composed of uniform cells with scant pink granular cytoplasm. So this is the microscopic picture of the carcinoid tumor. So this is all for today, and thank you. And if you have any question, you can have query. Ma'am, your voice is stopped. Okay. So, any question? So if you have any query, you can ask me. Any question? If there is any confusion, you can please ask me. No question? Are you sure? Okay, you're welcome, beta. But if you have any question, you can ask me. Okay, then I think I should stop my lecture here. And I hope that everything is clear to you all. So thank you so much. Okay, hello.